Hey guys, welcome to Voice of Reason with Nathan. In today's episode, I wanted to give you some insights into relationship issues to help you better address them and more effectively manage yourself in any relationship issue that you're going through so that you can overcome the challenges that, again, we all go through in any relationship, especially when we're growing, developing, being more real in a relationship, say in marriage or with your children. You know, it's those relationships that are so important that we can often get caught up in these unhealthy dynamics and think that we're justified in the way that we're acting when it's actually really foolish. And have you ever seen this, in any other scenario, very rational, mature people, but then in their home environment, they act like absolute children. The way that they get moody, they get upset, they yell at their spouse or their children. And it's like if you were to show that publicly, you'd think, who on earth is this person? The abuse and the nonsense that goes on behind the scenes, but at work, they're a, stand-up person and, everyone think better of them. But then in the home environment, it's the absolute opposite. And I'm going to reference here transactional analysis because it's so interesting how all relationship issues, especially in a marriage or with our children, they are so closely linked with our childhood issues or the way that we observed and learned how to deal with issues in childhood. Say observing your parents or the family dynamics that you grew up in. Very often, or always, we bring them into our own families, with our children, with our spouse, even in our workplaces. The different ways that our colleagues can represent family members and so on and so forth. It's very interesting. And transactional analysis, it gives us these three states that we all function out of. In any interaction, there's a transaction that takes place. And depending on how we're coming into that relationship, what state we're responding out of will determine the transaction that takes place. So, like I mentioned before, if someone's acting in a certain way in the home environment that's, very childish, that's coming out of the child state. That's coming out of this place that they observed and learned through childhood how to deal with issues. Now, if they're coming at it more from a parent state, they can be coming more from like this place of authority and more from a compassionate space as well. And that's okay. And none of these states are bad in and of themselves. It's just that when one dominates the other and when it's unhealthy, that's where it becomes really destructive. And then there's the other state, which is the adult state. And that's the one that's in the middle, that's kind of rational, that's able to understand the issues at hand and deal with them more effectively. For example, looking at the behavior versus the identity of the person and not attacking the person's identity, but rather looking at what the behavior is at hand that needs to be addressed or that's not okay. And it's absolutely mind-boggling. I've counseled lots of couples and even in my own journey, all of us do this. We revert by default without having the awareness. We revert to default in the way that we dealt with issues as a child. So often, in childhood, you didn't know or you didn't have authority, you didn't, have the ability to deal with issues more effectively. So you would isolate, you'd withdraw, you'd scream, you'd yell, whatever you did in childhood. And when you haven't learned to address issues and conflict more effectively, you'll do the same thing even though you're an adult, you're not acting like an adult, you're acting like an absolute child, And the other flip side to that is when, you're acting like a parent and you've learned from your parents how to be a parent, right? And that's where you can be speaking to someone even though they're not a child, but you're talking to them like a child. And I'm sure as a viewer, you've experienced this, wherever it might be, like you've experienced this dynamic where someone's talking to you and it makes you feel like a child. It's like, and it's a weird thing. It's like, they're talking down to me. Why is that? Or they're coming at me from a really compassionate place and, and that can make you feel good. But again, it's that this sense of, and what transaction analysis talks about is this intrinsic view of oneself in the different states. So in a parent state, one is saying to themselves is, I'm okay, but the other person is not okay. And that's why you need to take the authority or come at it from a compassionate space because the other person's not okay. And that is then the reference point for a child is I'm not okay and they're okay. So I'm learning how to be okay And that's what we develop and grow and mature into when we're children. As we mature, as we age, hopefully we're moving more into the place of the middle ground of being an adult, being mature, learning what that looks like. And again, if we're not aware of these dynamics that play out, then we're going to be thinking that I'm okay, you're not okay, or in the child state, I'm not okay, you're okay. So we're always trying to perform, always trying to be better, and these dynamics that play out are absolutely fascinating. And in the middle state, the adult state, it's I'm okay, you're okay. So it's this intrinsic internal view of oneself that's I'm okay and you're okay. So I can talk to you on that level, I can be real with you, I can be honest. Now, what happens, and I've seen this play out so many times, when one person in the relationship is okay, they're coming at it from an adult place, and they're being real, they're being honest with the other person in a mature, rational fashion, not emotional, not blaming, not playing the identity game or anything of that nature. They're just being honest and sharing their concerns, and the other person starts crying and breaking down and screaming and yelling. What they're doing is they cannot conceive how to act like an adult. They don't have that framework, they don't have that reference point in that context, and they're reverting to childhood. Or they go into the parent state. So how dare you talk to me like that? It's your fault. You do this, you do that, and they start, using authority. And so, I'm not going there. And as the adult, you can actually not engage in that, because the trick there is where we do a switch. So say they're treating you like the parent, that can try to throw you into the child state. And in doing that, then you start acting like a child. You start acting out of that space. Don't do that. Or the other one is where they're going into child state and they try to throw you into the parent state, and then you can, go at it from a really compassionate place of just wanting to soothe and comfort them. But again, it's playing into the dynamic, and that often happens like in an addiction scenario, where someone's in addiction and they're just like, oh look, I didn't mean, I'm so sorry, and then your compassionate side comes out as the parent, and they're acting like a child even though they're not a child. Grow up, come into the adult state. Well, I'm glad you're sorry, I'm glad you're remorseful, but if you keep doing that, this is the consequences of what's going to happen. I need to put this in, not because you're bad in and of yourself, but the behavior is absolutely horrible and it's destructive and it's dysfunctional. So don't play into the switch game. Stay in the adult state. And I want to ask you this question: what does it look like to be an adult in the scenarios where you have some relationship issues? What does that actually look like? I want you to write a list. Think about that. Write a list of what it actually means to be an adult in those scenarios. If you don't have that reference point, then you're going to be flipping up and down the child state, the parent state. You'll be all over the place in these relationships. And I think we all do have an understanding of what an adult does in these scenarios. And the adult state, just as a reference, is able to rationalize, is able to look at the behavior, look at the problem, and address the issue at hand, and not play that game of being, the super compassionate and soothing, even though there's a place for that. I'm not saying not to be, compassionate. I'm not saying that at all. But when we're playing that dynamic game, that's where it gets unhealthy and we can play into it. So the adult is able to rationalize, to understand, to provide that soothing and that comfort, but in a way that helps the other person to also act okay as well. So I'm okay, you're okay. And realizing that you're okay, as a Christian, for me, it came out of that place and still continues to come out of that place of knowing that Christ has redeemed me. Christ has given me an intrinsic value, an intrinsic worth that I know I'm okay. Regardless of behavior, that is important, and it is absolutely essential in my Christian walk to act in a way that is in line with my values, to act in a way that's in line with Scripture. But my intrinsic view of myself, knowing that I'm okay, comes from the cross, comes from what Jesus paid for me on the cross. So knowing that God has said, I'm holy, I'm righteous because of Him, then enables me to come out of that place of being, I'm okay, and then also seeing other people as, even if they're not acting in an okay way, seeing them as okay in the sense of their identity, their worth is more than the way they're behaving. So if they're coming at me from a parent state and it's making me feel like a child, I can come back into the adult state and say, no, I'm not playing that game. I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to, put in some healthy boundaries. I'm going to, maintain control. I'm not going to act like a child. I'm not going to play that emotional game. I'm not going to allow them to abuse me. I'm not going to keep myself in an environment that's unhealthy. I'm going to respond to it in a more effective way. And then the child state and the parent state and all these states. I hope it's not too confusing, but essentially what I'm trying to encourage you to do is to be aware of this dynamic that plays out, and really take ownership and responsibility for your behavior, for the way that you're acting, the way that what state you're coming out of. And by doing that, it only takes one to shift and stop that switch, to stop that dynamic, the unhealthy dynamic that's playing in the relationship. It only takes one. It takes you making that decision today to come out of the adult state. I'm okay, you're okay, and let's get on with things. Let's grow, let's develop, let's allow ourselves to really go for it, to really take the relationships that we're in to the next level. Now, not everyone's going to be willing to do that, and that's just life, that's just the situation. But even through that, we can learn and grow if we're humble and willing to have an open mind. So I hope that this has blessed you guys. Take care and just go for it, enjoy, and be blessed.